Race Condition takes me back to the arcade classic days of mid-90s arcade racing games, such as Daytona 500 and so on and so forth. You've got a low-poly arcade world full of chunky polygons that's bringing the world together around you, but it's been updated to a 2022 idea and design. You've got 1 to 4 players that you can play locally in split-screen multiplayer, but you also have a single-player experience to unlock lots of tracks and an online time trial mode to really get to grips with going as fast as possible. There are some crinkles and weird oddities in the way how Race Condition works as a game that I think will impact on your enjoyability depending on where you fall in certain game design decisions, and I'll explain some of that later on. But fundamentally, Race Condition is a good, fun arcade classic that I think, especially if you're playing in split-screen multiplayer, will have you well serviced and oiled for plenty of hours to come. Race Condition segments itself into 3 distinct areas of gameplay. You've got the World Tour mode, which is where I'd recommend you start first for a single player experience. Then you've got multiplayer quick races that you can have fun with for 2 to 4 split screen multiplayer. And then you've got time trial mode as well, where you can go up against the world's best and see where you can end up on the online leaderboards for each race location. There are 21 tracks, but it's across 11 different destinations, so 10 of them have got a forward and reverse way around playing. A lot of them actually do feel quite different, and what makes them feel different is that depending on the forward and reverse, you'll have different weather conditions for whether it's a forward or reverse. You can't pick your weather condition for what track you're going to, but you will have some with rain, some are dry, some are at dawn or sunset, there's a nighttime race or two. Then you've got fog and snow throwing in for good measure as well, and the game feels and looks and plays slightly differently because of all of these different aesthetic changes that go on around you, and particularly when you're looking at snow, actually it affects the grip around you, and rain too, of course. The World Tour mode is where I'd recommend you start first, because this is where you unlock all of those 21 tracks as you go along, and this forms a kind of RPG extreme light gameplay aesthetic, because what you'll be doing is racing through a couple of races, racking up points as you go, depending on A, where you finish, B, if you get the top speed, and C, if you get the fastest lap. You get points taken away from you if you have to respawn onto the track from crashes. And this is quite key because the driving style of handling in Race Condition is really odd initially to get to grips with, and there's a little bit of a difficulty curve here, and to try and just get yourself familiar with it. The reason why I say this is because Race Condition has cars that get more and more flitty and skittish the faster you go, and so when you're at low speed there's tons of downforce and your car sticks to the road very, very happily, and if you use the brakes, particularly when you're going around some of the hairpin bends, you will oversteer very, very easily and you'll get yourself around tight corners quite nicely. But the vast majority of racing at Race Condition is done at really high speed, above 300 kilometers an hour, and so you're kind of skittishly almost becoming like a plane, and it feels like your car's about to lift off as you continue to go up and up and up in the speed. And this means that the car starts to like wiggle around and lose control, and it's difficult to make sure that you can get round corners without breaking yourself into a spinny drift. Drifting is not fast in this game. It's about trying to like feather the brake and the steering as best as possible. Now, right the way up until release, there was only one style of handling for this game, and I found it to be oversensitive. But thankfully, literally the day before release, the game has been updated to provide 3 different types of settings. And actually, I think because I've played this game for a couple of hours before this dropped, I was able to get to grips with the pro handling, which is low grip, high acceleration and top speed. But now you've got a balanced approach, which is kind of the middle ground of all 3, and then a training steering, which keeps you at a much lower top end speed and acceleration, but gives you all of the grip. And so you can kind of progress your way through those 3 different stylings as you work your way up to pro, which is absolutely the fastest way to go racing in Race Condition. You just have to tune your mind into handling it. So going back to you having to respawn all of the time, because your car is so light, and like the slightest nudge can quite often send you rolling, especially when you're tapping other AI cars. Tyre barriers are destructible, so sometimes you'll have tyres thrown across the road and you'll smash into them and go barrel rolling everywhere and somersaulting into oblivion. You'll quite often end up upside down, so then you need to press the respawn button, and that's what detracts you points from your overall score. Once you hit a threshold of a score, your driver level will level up, and that gives you access to more tracks that are then unlocked, which you can then play in the quick race modes for single player or multiplayer races, or attack on the time trials in the other modes. That's why I recommend starting with World Tour. World Tour takes about 90 minutes, 2 hours to get through before you can then go nuts on everything else elsewhere. But the reason why it takes you slightly longer is because the story mode places you at loggerheads with Mr. Dickman. Dick by name, Dick by nature, and quite frankly, his car is overpowered. And the game has this rubber banding tendency for whether you're too fast or too slow to make Mr. Dickman catch up and overtake you at all costs, regardless of what's going on in the game, and it doesn't feel like it's fair in any way, shape or form. He's way overpowered, but the whole story is, we think he's suspiciously overpowered, can you stop him? And so what you end up doing with race control is strategically playing the game until you get to the final fuel stop. And when you pass through the pits, you don't physically stop, but you take on fuel depending on how long and how slow you go through the pit lane on your way to recuperating fuel. What you do is at the last stop, because the rubber banding is so strong one way or another, it will slow down Dickman to the point where you can catch him back up again and then try and either overshot him by doing some absolutely blinding last corners, normally smashing him out of the way and hoping for the best, or when you both come into the pits for your last stop on the same lap together, the AI can slow down slightly more than you, so you can kind of bomb it through and hope you've got enough fuel to make it to the end and go from there. It feels slightly cheap, and it feels like the rubber banding really over-eggs itself in the World Tour mode. But this problem doesn't translate nearly as badly across to the other types of experience, mainly because Time Trial will have no AI in, it's you up against everyone else on the leaderboards, and there's something strangely zen about racing in race condition around Time Trial, looking at online laps and just seeing like, oh, I'm 0.003 behind the next person on the leaderboard, really got to go for it. It's really well designed actually, the way how that all comes together. But also the AI is nowhere near as rubber banded in the multiplayer experience for Quick Race. So because I think you can have people being really fast or really slow, they just seem to drive their own race. And I found that a much more wholesome experience to go racing in Quick Race rather than in World Tour itself. Do World Tour to grab all the tracks and the bonus car that you can unlock for the different shades. But yeah, stay in Quick Race from then on afterwards, just for your own sanity, please. So with the rubber banding issue being one of, I think, the core quirks of this game, the second thing I would say is the handling itself. I mentioned earlier that everything feels lightweight and everything is really finicky in that over-responsive feel, but the longer you spend with the game, the more nuance you see in the handling and the less of an issue it becomes over time. But I can absolutely see people on their first couple of tries of this game going, what is this? And then kind of slowly tweaking their way into it again, because things feel like they're not going to turn and then all of a sudden just grip and go. And so understanding that nuance, especially because it seems to be like to the power of deceleration, seems to be like the mass increase of grip that you get to be able to get around a corner. Think of it like you're racing open-wheeled planes, I guess is the best way to describe this, and you'll get race condition. So yeah, I've been critical of a couple of points, but genuinely I had a really good experience playing this game. I will be coming back to this time and time again. I think it's going to be good fun for arcade multiplayer action. The 2 to 4 split screen modes worked beautifully, especially because there's a lot of speed going on in this game. I know it's low poly, but it's doing a lot when you've got 2, 3 or 4 people playing, and didn't experience any slowdown or any problems with it whatsoever, which I think is a great testament for something that is really an indie one guy team as far as I'm aware. So hats off from a technical perspective. I think this works a dream. Whilst the handling wasn't necessarily 100% to my liking, I was able to get used to it over time and find that it was still rewarding and fun to play. The rubber banding did kind of kill my joy a little bit on the quick tour mode. Thankfully, it's nowhere near as bad in the quick races, so grab all of those tracks and then have this as a good multiplayer experience. Or if you really get the knack for it, getting top scores on those time trials and getting yourself up that leaderboard is a strangely engrossing challenge that I genuinely relished. Written review will be over on higherplayinggames.com over the next 24 hours. Any questions, leave them down below because I'll be able to answer them for you. I hope you found yourself potentially another great racing game to add to your collection. Take care all. Bye-bye. Higher Plane Games is part of the Higher Plane Network, a completely independent media outlet supported by people like you. The goal is to create the best possible content that cultivates a richer indie scene for games as well as music and entertainment. To find out more and to get involved, visit patreon.com/higherplane network. Your support makes all the difference, and in return you'll gain access to bonus content and downloads. Thank you for watching.